The tape was waiting on my kitchen table when I came home from the cemetery. I knew before I touched it that it did not belong there. The apartment was exactly as I had left it that morning. The blinds half closed against a gray, drizzling sky, the sink full of the coffee mug I never washed before work, my dead brother's house key still hanging on the hook by the door because I had not yet found the strength to take it down. Nothing was overturned. Nothing was broken. There was no sign of forced entry. And yet there it sat in the center of the table like an Accusation 1 black VHS cassette with a strip of yellowing masking tape across the front. In blocky, familiar handwriting were 6 words that made every hair on my body rise at once. Watch after I die. I stood in the doorway so long my hand went numb around my keys. Outside, tires hissed over wet asphalt. Somewhere upstairs, a television laughed at a joke. My own apartment felt sealed off from all of it, as if I had opened the wrong door and stepped into a room that only looked like mine. I remember staring at the handwriting more than the words themselves, because I knew that handwriting. I had seen it on birthday cards, on post-it notes stuck to my fridge, on the cheap envelopes my brother Daniel used when he still mailed things instead of texting. Daniel had been buried 3 hours earlier. I crossed the room slowly as if the tape might react to sudden movement. My shoes whispered over the hardwood. My jacket was still damp from the cemetery rain, and cold water slid down the back of my neck. I didn't feel it much. All I could feel was the violent, sick thudding in my chest. Daniel's handwriting. No. Not just similar. Not close. He used to press too hard with the pen. Every letter had that carved-in look, as if he was trying to engrave meaning into cheap paper. Even now, I could see where the tip had dragged slightly on the final E in DIE. A tiny groove in the masking tape. I didn't sit down. I didn't call the police. I didn't call our mother, who had cried herself voiceless beside the grave while the priest spoke over the lowering casket. I just stared, and in that staring my mind did what grieving minds do. It scrambled for a sane explanation with all the desperate speed of a trapped animal. He prepared this before he died. Someone dropped it off. A cruel joke. An old tape I forgot he made. But none of those explanations survived the next detail. The cassette case was wet. Not dripping. Just faintly damp, the way something gets damp when carried through mist or held by cold hands in colder air. When I touched it, my fingertips came away with a smell I recognized instantly and wished I didn't. Earth. Not clean soil. Not garden dirt. Damp, mineral graveyard earth. Rich and sour and deep, with the odor of roots and rot folded inside it. I jerked my hand back so hard I knocked over the salt shaker by the stove. It hit the floor and rolled beneath the radiator. For a moment I thought I might be sick. Daniel hadn't believed in omens. He believed in invoices, in electric bills, in changing your oil before your engine punished you for laziness. He was the practical one. The older brother by 4 years, broad-shouldered, impatient, always acting as if the universe could be forced into order if you just made enough lists. Even when he got sick, he stayed practical. Glioblastoma. Aggressive. Inoperable by the time they caught it. 8 months from diagnosis to funeral. 8 months of antiseptic hospital rooms, bald jokes that stopped being funny, and the terrible shrinking of someone who had once filled every room he entered. Near the end, when the painkillers started making his sleep ragged and his waking stranger, he said things that unsettled me. Not nonsense. Worse than nonsense. Warnings. Don't answer if you hear me downstairs. That was one. Another, in a whisper while our mother dozed in the corner chair. If something comes back looking relieved, it isn't me. At the time, I wrote it off. Brain swelling. Medication. Fear dressing itself up as intuition. 3 nights before he died, I sat with him in hospice while rain ticked at the window and the heart monitor cast green light over his drawn face. He had been asleep or pretending to be for almost an hour when he opened his eyes and said, very clearly, when it happens, Leo, don't watch it alone. I asked, watch what? But he only stared past me into the darkened television screen mounted on the opposite wall. In the reflection, I could see myself beside the bed and him under the blankets and the little lamp by the door. And for just a second less than a blink, something my mind still tries to deny, I thought I saw a third figure standing behind me in that reflection. Tall. Narrow. Watching. When I turned, there was nothing there. Daniel died the following afternoon. I had not thought about those words all day. Funerals crush everything else. They hand you tasks so you don't go mad. Choose flowers, greet relatives, sign forms, stand, sit, carry, lower, leave. It wasn't until I found the tape that his voice came back with all the clarity of a fresh wound. Don't watch it alone. The apartment was very quiet. Too quiet suddenly. I became aware that I could no longer hear the upstairs television, or the rain, or traffic. There was only the hum of my refrigerator and a faint, intermittent tapping sound from somewhere deeper in the apartment. Tap, tap, tap. I turned toward the hallway. Darkness pooled there, though it was barely late afternoon. My bedroom door stood open. The bathroom door was half shut. The tapping came again, soft and irregular, like fingernails exploring wood.
Hello?
I said before I could stop myself. The tapping ceased. Silence spread wider, denser, until the little kitchen seemed to be listening with me. My scalp prickled.
Is someone in here?
No answer. Of course there wasn't. I knew that. But grief and nerves make cowards of the body before the mind catches up. I grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, a cast iron skillet from the drying rakan, stepped into the hallway. The carpet runner muffled my footsteps. The air back there felt colder than it should have. Not a draft. A coldness that seemed to come from surfaces themselves, the walls, the picture frames, the cheap mirror at the end of the hall reflecting a long strip of dim apartment behind me. I checked the bedroom first. Empty. Bed unmade. Window latched. Closet half open, shirts hanging in the stillness. Bathroom. Empty. Hall closet. The door stuck at first, swollen by humidity. I yanked harder, and it opened with a crackle of paint. Winter coats, vacuum cleaner, shoe rack, Daniel's old toolbox on the top shelf where he had left it 2 years ago after fixing my sink. Nothing else. I stood there breathing hard, gripping the skillet so tightly my palm hurt. Then, from the kitchen behind me came the unmistakable sound of plastic scraping wood. I spun around and almost slipped on the runner. Back in the kitchen, the VHS cassette was no longer in the center of the table. It was resting at the very edge, angled toward the floor, as if someone had pushed it inch by inch until gravity nearly claimed it. I stared at it. The windows were closed. No vibration, no tilt, no reason. Still, I crossed the room in 3 fast steps and snatched it up. The plastic was colder now. Cold enough to sting. Underneath where it had been sitting was a smear of wet brown dirt on the table and something else, something thinner, darker, caught in the moisture.
A hair.
Not one of mine. Too coarse. Too long. Black and straight and glossy with mud. I dropped it as if it had burned me. My first coherent thought was that I needed another person there. Immediately. Neighbor, friend, anyone. The second thought was that no one would believe me if I led with my dead brother, mailed me a grave-smelling videotape, and it moved by itself. The third thought, shamefully, was that I didn't want witnesses. Because if this was real, if this had anything to do with Daniel, with the things he had muttered in hospice, with the look in his eyes in those last lucid moments, then the truth inside it might be mine before it was anyone else's. That is the selfishness grief breeds. The ugly hope that the impossible has chosen you personally. I set the skillet down, picked up my phone, opened my contact. My thumb hovered over Mara's name. We had dated for 3 years and broken up 6 months before Daniel's diagnosis. She still came to the hospital once, brought coffee, hugged my mother, and stood in the hallway with me while we pretended not to remember what we had once been to each other. She was the one person I could call without explaining all the family history first. The one person who would hear the panic in my voice and come. I pressed call. The phone immediately went to dead silence. No ringing, no error tone. Just open, empty static, so faint I almost mistook it for breath. Then a sound emerged from its soft, rhythmic wet. Someone inhaling through a blocked nose. My mouth went dry.
Hello?
The breathing stopped. For 1 second there was absolute silence. Then, from the phone speaker in the apartment hallway at the same time, a voice whispered, "Leo." I dropped the phone. It hit the floor face up and skidded under the table, the screen still glowing. I knew that voice. Daniel's voice, thin by illness but unmistakable. I backed into the counter so hard a spoon clattered in the sink. My legs felt loose, hollow. There was a roaring in my ears. The hallway beyond the kitchen looked impossibly long now. much longer than my apartment allowed, the darkness at the far end thicker than shadow, almost textured. "Daniel," I said, and hated myself the instant the name left my mouth. Something moved in the hall. Not a full shape. Just a suggestion of height passing the mirror too quickly to resolve. But the mirror caught it for a fraction longer than my eyes did. A pale oval face, head tilted at an angle no neck should hold, and beneath it the dark hanging lines of wet clothing. I bolted to the living room and slammed the hallway door, though it was only a decorative folding divider that barely latched. I shoved a chair under the knob anyway. My whole body was shaking now. Not cinematic trembling. The ugly, helpless shudder of adrenaline finding too much space in flesh. From the other side of the divider came a slow drag, as if someone was pulling their fingertips down the wood. Then 3 knocks. Gentle. I forced myself not to answer. Forced myself to breathe through my nose. Count 1 to 10. Then to 20. The knocks did not come again. My phone buzzed under the table. I crouched and reached for it, keeping my eyes on the hallway door the whole time. The call screen was gone. In its place was a new notification. 1 voicemail, no number. Just unknown sender. Hands clumsy, I pressed play. For several seconds there was only hiss, the magnetic whisper of old recording. Then came the sound of a chair scraping concrete, followed by Daniel's voice, stronger than it had been in months, healthier somehow, but carrying a terror so naked I almost didn't recognize him. "Leo, if you're hearing this, then it got there before I could stop it." A crackling pause. I could hear him breathing hard. "I need you to listen carefully. Don't pause it. Don't rewind it. And whatever you see on the tape, whatever it says to make you let it in, you need to remember something." His voice broke then, as though he had turned his head and seen someone enter the room with him. When he spoke again, it was in a whisper. "It learns you by being watched." The voicemail ended. At the exact same moment, from somewhere inside the apartment, a machine clicked. A dry mechanical sound from another decade. I turned slowly toward the television in my living room. I had not owned a VCR in years, but now, beneath the TV where my game console should have been, sat an old black cassette player crusted with dirt, its digital clock blinking 12 p.m. in green. And with a grinding swallow of gears, the slot in its face pulled open by itself.
Waiting.
For several seconds I could not move. The VCR sat beneath the television like it had always belonged there, squat and black and dusted with damp soil. Its surface slick in places where mud had dried and cracked like old blood. I knew with absolute certainty that it had not been in my apartment that morning. I knew it with the same certainty I knew my own name. My game console had been there instead. A silver controller still lay on the rug in front of the TV stand where I had left it 2 nights ago, but the console itself was gone. In its place, this thing waited. The slot remained open. The green digits on the front blinked in mute, patient intervals. 12 p.m., 12 p.m., 12 p.m. Behind me from the hallway divider came another soft knock. Not loud, not urgent, polite. I turned my head just enough to look at the chair jammed under the knob. It trembled once, almost delicately, as though something on the other side had rested a hand against the wood to test it. Then it stopped. My throat felt too tight to swallow. Daniel's voicemail still glowed on my phone screen, the progress bar sitting at the end like a wound that refused to close. I played it again because I didn't know what else to do, because hearing his voice felt both unbearable and necessary. "If you're hearing this, then it got there before I could stop it." The line hissed. "I need you to listen carefully. Don't pause it. Don't rewind it. And whatever you see on the tape, whatever it says to make you let it in, you need to remember something." A rustle. His breathing strained but fast. "It learns you by being watched." The message ended. I stood there staring at my own reflection in the black television screen.
Pale face, rain damp hair.
Eyes too wide. Behind me, the apartment seemed deeper than it should have been, corners swollen with shadow. I could see the faint outline of the kitchen and the glimmer of the overhead light, but the hallway beyond the divider was just a dark seam. The tape lay where I had dropped it on the rug near my foot. I bent slowly and picked it up again. The casing was old enough that the clear plastic windows had yellowed at the corners. Through them, I could see the reels of tape wound tight in black. Dirt clung to the edges. The label in Daniel's handwriting looked darker now, as if the ink had seeped while I wasn't looking. Watch after I die. The wording struck me then in a way it had not before. Not if I die, not when I'm gone. After. Like he had known there would be an after, and that something specific would begin there. My hand was shaking so hard the cassette rattled softly. I wanted to throw it out the window. I wanted to run downstairs and never come back. I wanted to call the police, a priest, a locksmith, my mother Mara, anyone with a calmer mind and a more ordinary explanation. But beneath all of it, beneath the fear, beneath the nausea was the old instinct Daniel himself had put in me. When something is wrong, find the pattern. That was how he approached broken engines, bad wiring, unpaid taxes, chest pains, suspicious boyfriends, anything in life that threatened to become chaos. Find the pattern and the thing becomes survivable. So I forced myself to think. Daniel had left a voicemail with instructions. No pause. No rewind. Whatever you see, don't let it in. It learns you by being watched. He had not said don't watch it. That mattered. If he wanted me ignorant, he would have said destroy it. Instead, he warned me about how to watch, which meant he had wanted me to know something terrible enough to risk this. Another knock from the divider. This one lower, closer to the floor. Then a faint drag, like fabric moving over carpet. I looked toward it and immediately regretted it, because beneath the narrow gap under the divider I could see a darkness that was not cast by anything in the room. It pooled there, too thick, too complete. Like the hallway beyond had gone lightless in a way the rest of the apartment had not. Something shifted in that blackness. A fingertip pressed briefly under the gap.
Polly.
Mud-caked. Human-looking except for the nail, which was dark and split vertically down the center like old horn. I stumbled backward and nearly dropped the tape. The finger withdrew. Then came Daniel's voice from the other side, muffled by the divider, faintly distorted by wood.
Leo?
Tears sprang into my eyes so fast it angered me. That was what grief does best. It makes every cruelty effective. The voice sounded like him at 35, before the tumor. Tired, low, warm. The voice that had picked me up from county jail after a stupid drunken fight in college, and spent the drive home telling me I was an idiot without ever making me feel abandoned. The voice that used to call me at midnight just to say, "You paying attention to this storm?" Because he knew thunder made me feel less alone. "Leo," it said again, softer now. "Open the door." I shut my eyes.
No.
Daniel had warned me. Daniel had whispered from a hospital bed not to answer if I heard him downstairs. Daniel had feared something wearing relief like a mask. The thing at the divider knocked twice. "Please!" My jaw clenched so hard it hurt.
You're not him.
Silence. Then a sound like a smile entering a voice. "No," it said. The divider shook violently. The chair skidded back 3 inches with a squeal of wood across wood. I lunged for it, shoving it harder into place, bracing both hands against the divider as another impact hit from the other side. Not a body slam. More like a curious testing shove. Something gauging the structure, the weak points, my strength. The wood bowed inward. A damp smell leaked through the seam between the panel's earth, stagnant water, and the sweet, cloying odor of flowers left too long on graves. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pressure ceased. No footsteps retreated. No rustle, no breathing. Just nothing. I stayed there another minute, palms flat against the divider, waiting for the next strike. It never came. When I finally backed away, I realized I had made my choice. I was going to watch the tape. Not because I was brave. Because whatever was in the hallway already knew my name, already wore my brother's voice, already seemed perfectly content to wait. Not watching would not put me back in the ordinary world. That door had already closed. I crouched by the VCR. The eject slot remained open, humming faintly. The machine's surface was gritty beneath my fingers. One corner bore a small silver sticker from a rental store that had gone out of business when I was 12. The sight of it sent a strange cold thread through me. Daniel and I had gone there as kids with our father. Friday nights, action movies for him, horror movies Daniel wasn't old enough to rent but somehow always talked Dad into taking home anyway. I remembered a particular October evening. Rain streaking the windshield, Daniel in the passenger seat clutching a VHS tape between both hands like treasure, telling me in a solemn whisper that the scariest part of any movie was the moment before it started, because then it could still be anything. The memory hit so vividly I almost smelled the wet upholstery of our father's old truck, and then it soured. Because on the VCR's plastic shell, written in a thin line through the dust as if by someone's finger, were 3 words that had not been there a second earlier. "IT still is." I dropped to my knees so fast pain shot up my legs. Something laughed. Not from the VCR. Not from the divider. From the television. The screen was still dark, but the sound came through the speakers in a low, broken crackle like laughter recorded underwater. It lasted only a second. Then silence. My apartment had become a place where silence was never empty. It was only the space between signals. I shoved the tape into the VCR before I could lose my nerve. The machine accepted it with a hungry mechanical gulp. The open slot snapped shut. The reels inside began to turn. The television screen flashed white static so bright I recoiled, and then the image stabilized into grainy black and white.
At first, I thought I was looking at snow.
It took my eyes a second to understand that the white flecks drifting across the screen were not static but rain, lit by a camera-mounted lamp. The frame tilted slightly, shaky handheld footage. Someone was outside at night. The camera lowered and muddy ground filled the screen. Wet grass. A pair of men's shoes sinking into earth. The breathing behind the camera was ragged, terrified. Then Daniel's voice whispered from behind the lens. "If this works, Leo, I only get one shot." The image lurched upward. My stomach tightened. The camera was pointed at a cemetery. Rows of stones rose from the darkness, their faces glistening with rain. Branches thrashed overhead like black veins against a colorless sky. It was our cemetery. I recognized the sloping hillside, the iron fence, the crooked angel monument near the east wall. I had stood there this morning in my funeral clothes while they lowered my brother into the ground. But this video had clearly been recorded at night. And as the camera swung slowly left, I saw the date chiseled into the nearest new headstone. Daniel Mercer, 1987-2026 rain coursed down the carved numbers. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. The footage jerked as Daniel started walking. He was breathing hard enough that the microphone distorted with each inhale. The beam of the camera light shook over graves, flowers, puddles. Then, at the edge of the frame, another light appeared, yellow and weak, like from an old lantern. The camera snapped toward it. Someone was standing by Daniel's grave. Tall, motionless. Their back to the camera. They wore what looked like a burial suit, black fabric hanging strangely from a body too thin to fill it. Rain slicked their shoulders. Their head was bowed. I leaned forward before I could stop myself. The figure lifted one hand and touched the top of Daniel's headstone almost tenderly. Then Daniel, breathing harder, whispered, "That's not me yet." The figure turned. The image blurred for a second as the camera jerked, but I saw enough. God, I saw enough. It had Daniel's face. Not perfectly. Not in the cheap, obvious way a mask imitates a face. This was worse. This was his face the way wax might remember a man after being held too near flame. Features softened in places, stretched in others. The eyes were too dark and too deep. The mouth carried the shape of his, but opened slightly too wide at the corners, revealing teeth that looked small and crowded as infant bones. Its skin shone wetly. It smiled at the camera with immediate recognition.
"Found you," it said in Daniel's voice.
I flinched so hard I nearly fell backward. On screen, Daniel gasped and ran. The footage became violent motion stones streaking by, rain slashing white, the beam of the light stuttering as he stumbled over uneven ground. Behind him came the sound of feet moving with horrible, effortless speed through mud, not splashing, skimming. I shouldn't have looked in the box, Daniel panted into the camera. I shouldn't have watched the whole thing. A hand seized the shoulder of his jacket from behind. The frame spun. For one frozen second, the creature's face filled the entire television screen, close enough for me to see clotted grave dirt and the wrinkles around its eyes. Its mouth opened. Inside was another mouth. Not metaphorically. Not a trick of shadow. A second wet human mouth nested inside the first, lips peeling back slowly as if waking up. Then the footage cut to static. I recoiled, hand over my mouth. The static hissed for several seconds. My pulse slammed in my throat. I thought maybe that was it. Some impossible warning from a dead man recorded before the worst of his illness. Some stunt or nightmare or elaborate collapse of reality my mind would eventually wake from. Then the static thinned and a new image emerged. A room, small, concrete walls, bare bulb overhead. Daniel sat in a metal chair facing the camera, alive. Not healthy, his face was gaunt, his skull shaved, the bruised crescents under his eyes dark as thumbprints, but alive, alert, and staring directly into the lens. He wore the gray hospice sweatshirt I had folded and packed for him on his second week there. There was dried blood under one nostril. His hands were zip-tied behind the chair. I stopped breathing.
"Leo," he said.
No camera shake now. No rain. No panic. Just Daniel, framed from the waist up, speaking with the horrible concentration of someone trying to outrun a deadline only he can see. If this is the version you're watching, then I'm dead already. And if I'm dead already, it means it followed the bloodline exactly the way I was afraid it would. My knees gave out. I sat down hard on the rug without feeling the impact. On-screen, Daniel turned his head slightly, listening to something out of frame. A distant metallic bang echoed through the room he was in. When he looked back, his fear had sharpened. "You need to understand this before it starts using me properly," he swallowed. 2 months before my diagnosis, I found a tape inside Dad's things. Not in the attic, not in storage. Inside the wall behind the workbench in the garage. Wrapped in a trash bag with his watch in one of his teeth. I stared at him, uncomprehending. Our father had died 11 years ago of what everyone called a stroke. Sudden. Kitchen floor. No mystery, no scandal, no loose thread that had ever begged to be tugged. Daniel went on. The label said the same thing. "Watch after I die." His handwriting. I thought it was grief making a joke from the grave. I watched it alone. He squeezed his eyes shut for 1 second, steadying himself. When the tape ended, there was someone standing in the reflection of the TV behind me. Not there in the room, only in the glass. It had Dad's face, but wrong, wet. Smiling, like it had just learned where all the parts went. I became aware of the room around me again only because my living room felt colder with every word. Not cool. Cold enough that my breath was beginning to fog. Daniel continued, voice tightening. "It doesn't haunt places. It doesn't haunt objects. It inherits people. It comes in through watching. But it stays through grief. That's why it waits for death in the family. That's why it learns the voice first, then the face. Then whatever you'd open the door." A crack appeared in his composure. He looked suddenly, terribly like the older brother who used to keep his fear private so mine could be smaller. I tried burning the tape. It came back on the kitchen table. I smashed the TV. It waited in the microwave door. I stopped sleeping near mirrors. It started using windows at night. He leaned forward as far as the chair allowed. "Listen to me carefully. There's a box Dad hid. I found it because he left clues where only we'd understand them. Behind the garage workbench, there's a hollow in the studs. Inside that hollow was a ledger," and he froze. I saw it at the same time he did. Not in the room with him. Behind him, in the dark reflection on the concrete wall where the bare bulb cast a faint shine, another shape had appeared. Standing just outside the camera's direct view. Tall, head tilted, watching him speak, wearing Daniel's face. On the tape, Daniel's eyes filled with a dread so complete it made him look like a child. He did not turn around. He kept staring at the reflection.
"It found me faster than Dad," he whispered.
The thing behind him in the reflection slowly raised one hand. Its fingers brushed the back of Daniel's shoulder. Daniel shut his eyes and said very softly, "Don't let Mom hear me." Then the television screen went black. Not static. Not cut footage. Black. In the glass, I saw my own reflection sitting on the rug. And over my right shoulder, close enough that I should have felt its breath, I saw Daniel standing behind me. Not sick Daniel. Not hospice Daniel. Funeral Daniel. In the black suit we buried him in, damp with grave water, face pale and swollen slightly beneath the makeup, lips tinged an impossible bluish gray. He smiled with his mouth closed. And in the reflection only, he lifted one finger to his lips. I spun around. Nothing behind me. When I turned back to the TV, the screen was showing static again. But now there was sound beneath the hiss. A low voice, almost too soft to make out, speaking from inside the snow. Not Daniel's. Mine. repeating the same sentence over and over in a whisper so terrified it barely sounded human. "It's in the room with me. It's in the room with me. It's in the room with me." Then the hallway divider began to open from the inside. The divider opened by 1 inch. Then 2. The chair wedged beneath the knob scraped across the hardwood in tiny protesting jerks, as if whatever stood in the hallway had decided force was unnecessary and patience would do. I was still on the rug in front of the television, half twisted from looking behind me, when the narrow seam between the folding panels widened enough for darkness to show through. Not hallway darkness. A blackness with depth in it, like looking down a well at midnight. I stumbled backward on my hands and heels until my spine struck the coffee table. The VHS hiss filled the room, and beneath it my own whispered voice kept repeating from the television speakers, ragged and frantic. "It's in the room with me. It's in the room with me." The divider moved another inch. A smell spilled through the widening gap-wet soil, old flowers, the copper tang of something recently bled, and beneath all of it the sickly sweet perfume of hospital disinfectant. The mixed scent hit me so hard it dragged up a memory whole and intact. Daniel's hospice room at 3 a.m., the blinds closed, the sink full of paper cups, his blanket risen in a little tent over his sharp knees while the morphine pump clicked in the dark. On his last lucid night, he had caught my wrist and said, "Dad wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being copied." At the time, I told him to sleep. Now that sentence landed in me like a nail. The divider opened enough for fingers to appear around its edge. 5 of them, mud-caked, long. Human in structure, wrong in detail. The knuckles bulged too high. The nails were dull black and split down the center. A string of dark water hung from the index finger and broke, pattering softly onto the floorboards. Then Daniel's voice came through the gap, low and tired and heartbreakingly familiar. "You saw enough, Leo. Let me..." I was already shaking my head before I realized I was doing it.
No.
The fingers tightened on the divider. The wood creaked. "I know you miss me." The sentence was perfectly pitched. No theatrics. No growl.
No ghostly echo.
Just Daniel sounding exactly like he had after long shifts at the machine shop, when he'd drop onto my couch, steal one of my beers, and speak from that exhausted place where the voice becomes its truest self. That was what made it so foul. It understood restraint. I pushed myself up, never taking my eyes off the gap. "Tell me something only Daniel would know." A pause. Then, softly, "You were 8 when you split your chin open on the river rocks. You told Mom you slipped, but you slipped because I shoved you first and made you promise not to tell."
My stomach dropped.
That had happened. I had forgotten it for years until that moment. Forgotten the shock of cold river water and Daniel hauling me up by the back of my shirt while blood ran down my neck. He had been 12 and terrified Dad would find out he'd been roughhousing near the fast current. The thing at the divider let the silence sit, confident.
"You see?"
it whispered.
"I'm here."
The panel opened another inch. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, the heavy ceramic lamp from the side table, and hurled it at the gap. It exploded against the divider with a crack like a gunshot, showering the living room with white shards. The fingers vanished. The panel slammed shut. For one blessed second there was silence. Then the knocking started again. Not polite anymore. A hard, rhythmic pounding that rattled the divider in its frame. Each blow sent little tremors through the floor. The TV hiss grew louder, and my whispered, recorded voice dissolved into another sound. Low, overlapping speech, as if 100 distant people were all trying to use my throat at once. I lunged for the remote. The batteries were dead. Of course they were. The static on the television thickened, thinned, and then became a new image. Not Daniel this time. A room I knew. Our father's garage. The old pegboard wall, the red Craftsman toolbox, the warped plywood workbench with burn marks from a soldering iron Dad had insisted on using long after the cord started smoking. The footage looked older than Daniel's segment, grainier, washed with faint blue distortions. Home video old. Someone sat in a chair facing the camera.
My father.
For a moment, my mind simply rejected it. It refused to lay the image over memory. Dad had been gone too long. 11 years had turned his face into fragments. Nicotine-stained fingers, forehead slick with sweat under summer heat, the deep crease beside his mouth when he was angry. But there he was on the screen wearing his denim work shirt, one sleeve rolled higher than the other, his wedding ring dull under the garage light. He looked terrified. Older than I remembered him looking in life. Not with years, just with strain. His eyes were bloodshot. His cheek was bruised yellow-green. There was a little cut on his lower lip. He stared into the camera as if it were the only thing between him and some advancing edge. "If Daniel found this before I could destroy it," he said, "then I failed." The pounding on the divider stopped. The entire apartment seemed to lean in. My father glanced over his shoulder towards some unseen point in the garage. "Boys, if either of you sees this, listen to me and do exactly what I say. Do not play any tape that comes with my face on it after this one. Don't even look at the casing. Burn it without reading. Then tear out the west wall behind the bench and take what's inside somewhere sunlight reaches all day." He swallowed hard. It started with my father, and if it started before him, I never learned how far back. Men in this family keep records when they're scared. That's how I know the pattern. Death in the house. A message after death. Someone watches alone. Then it begins learning the next one. His voice dipped on the word learning. There are rules. They aren't enough, but there's something. He looked down as if reading from notes just out of frame. It comes in through recorded image and reflected image. Never direct at first. Glass teaches it shape. Film teaches it sequence. Grief teaches it access. A chill swept through me so sharply my teeth clicked together. On the other side of the divider, something moved. Not pounding now, scratching. Slow and exploratory, nails drifting down the wood. Dad continued. Once it's seen, it starts rehearsing. Voice first, then memory, then gesture. It wants to become the dead closely enough that the living choose it willingly. The TV image flickered. For a frame just one, my father's face became Daniel's face, then snapped back. I took an involuntary step backward. On screen, Dad shut his eyes like a man fighting pain. Do not answer it from another room. Do not follow voices into darkness. Do not sleep with uncovered mirrors in the house after first contact. And if it ever tells you it wants to come inside, understand what that means. He looked directly into the lens. It doesn't mean the house. The image rippled violently. From the hallway came Daniel's voice again, but now it was joined by another, deeper voice underneath it, speaking a split second out of sync. Leo. I went cold from scalp to heel. My father's face on the television changed. He was still talking, but a distortion dragged his mouth wider than human speech required. It means you. The TV shrieked with feedback. I slapped both hands over my ears. The sound ripped through the room, high and metallic, a blade of noise that seemed to come from the machine and the walls and the back of my own teeth. The image collapsed into rolling static, then reformed into the garage again. But now the camera was no longer fixed on my father. It was lying on its side on the floor. The angle was canted, showing only the concrete, the lower half of the workbench, and my father's boots dragging backward as if he were being pulled. He was screaming off-screen. Not words at first. Then words. Don't let it use my voice. A hand came into view around his ankle. My throat closed. The hand was wrong in the exact same way as the fingers at my divider, too long, mud arc, joints bent a little too far. It dragged him across the concrete with impossible ease. His heels kicked. A wrench clattered. Something heavy toppled from the bench. Then another pair of feet entered frame. Bare feet, wet with dark mud. The camera caught only the lower legs and the hem of a pair of suit pants soaked to the knee. The figure dragging him stepped over the lens, and for a second the whole screen went black as cloth passed across it. When the image cleared, my father was gone. But something else was there. On the workbench above the fallen camera, propped upright against a coffee can full of screws, sat a VHS tape with a strip of masking tape across the front. The footage zoomed in slowly by itself, the motor whining as if no hand touched it. On the label were 6 words in my father's handwriting. Watch after I die. The screen cut to black again. My living room reflected in it. And this time, in the reflection, the divider behind me was no longer merely open by an inch. It stood half open. I spun. It was true. A wedge of hallway lay exposed beyond it, but it did not look like my hallway anymore. It looked longer, wrong-angled, stretched into a depth my apartment could not hold. The walls seemed damp. The family photos hanging there had turned their glass faces toward the floor as if refusing to witness what stood at the far end. Something stood there, not close enough to resolve fully. Only shape, tall, narrow, head bent slightly to one side. The suit. The pale oval of a face. The stillness of something that did not need to approach quickly because it already understood that terror makes people come halfway on their own. Then it spoke, not in Daniel's voice, not in my father's, in my own. "Leo," it said from the end of the hall, with my exact cadence, my exact breath, "don't turn around." Every muscle in me locked, because the voice had come from ahead of me. But something warm had just exhaled onto the back of my neck. I spun anyway. Nothing visible. And yet the air directly behind me bulged with presence, as unmistakable as a person standing chest to back in the dark. The hairs on my arms lifted.
My skin tight.
The smell of grave earth flooded my nose so strongly I gagged. The television clicked. Another image appeared. A close-up of a ledger page filmed by shaky hands. The writing was old, cramped, furious. The page heading read, "Mercer Family Observations Do Not Leave Unburned." The camera moved down the page, as though whoever had filmed it knew they were running out of time. I read fragments aloud without meaning to. "Does not imitate the dead, but builds them from witness, cannot cross into the living fully unless invited through recognition. Each generation leaves a box and a warning. But warnings become the road." Then one line underlined so hard the paper had nearly torn. "IT does not follow blood. IT follows the one who looks longest." My pulse seemed to stop. Daniel had said it followed the bloodline exactly as he feared. But Dad's note said otherwise. Bloodline was camouflage. Pattern was bait. It moved through families because families looked hardest at their dead. And tonight in this apartment, no one had looked longer than I had. The screen flashed to another page. A hand my father's, I think, jabbed at a paragraph near the bottom. "If exposure occurs, go to the box. Box contains original witness ledger, burial account, and the unreflected thing. Must not be opened indoors. Must not be viewed near glass. Must be carried by the next." The footage glitched, then froze. A cracked gray face suddenly filled the frame. Not Daniel, not Dan, something older. Skin stretched thin as wet paper over a human arrangement of bone. Eyes black and deep-set. Mouth small until it smiled and then impossibly wide. The oldest copy. Its lips moved, and although the television made no sound, I heard the sentence clearly behind me, spoken directly into my ear in my own voice. "You were always the easier brother." I lurched forward with a shout and crashed into the coffee table. Pain shot up my shin. The TV image broke into static again. At the divider, the hallway thing took one slow step forward. Its shoes made no sound. The suit hanging from its frame was Daniel's funeral suit. Mud streaked the cuffs. Its face wavered as it moved, not changing exactly, but failing to settle. Daniel for 1 second. Dad the next. A stranger older than both. Then, horribly, an unfinished approximation of me. I backed away until my calves hit the TV stand. The VCR's green display changed for the first time. No longer 12 p.m. Now it read, "Garage.
West wall."
Now. The static hiss from the television softened into a whispering chorus. Amid the overlapping voices, one line emerged again and again, spoken by Daniel, by Dad, by me, by something that wore all three like masks. "If it reaches the doorway before you leave, don't take the front door." The thing in the hallway smiled. Then, from somewhere above me in the apartment ceiling, came a heavy impact, as if something had just dropped onto the roof of the world. A second impact answered it from inside the walls. Then a third directly beneath the floorboards. Not one thing in my apartment, many. And every voice in the television began whispering at once. It brought the others. The first thing I understood was that I had already waited too long. The second was that the apartment was no longer a place I could defend. Something moved above the ceiling again with a slow, deliberate crawl, plaster ticking faintly as weight shifted through old beams. Beneath the floor, another body or something that imitated the mechanics of a body dragged itself from one end of the living room to the other. The sound was muffled but intimate, as if the building itself had grown a throat and was swallowing in sections. In the hallway, the thing wearing my brother's funeral suit took another step forward. It did not hurry. That was the unbearable part. Urgency belonged entirely to me. Whatever had crossed into the apartment had none. It moved with the patience of mold or floodwater, with the certainty that all barriers were temporary and all panic eventually made useful mistakes. The VCR display still glowed green in the dark under the television. Garage.
West wall.
Now. Then the letters flickered and changed. Don't use the front door as if an answer. Something struck the inside of my apartment door so hard the chain lock screamed in its housing. The door bowed inward half an inch and settled. A second blow followed immediately from lower down near the knob, as though another pair of hands or not hands had chosen a different point to test. I backed away from the entry without looking at it. My gaze kept trying to slide back to the hallway figure, and every time it did, the face had changed by a fraction. Daniel, yes, but not steadily. Features softened, sharpened, lengthened. The eyes deepened. The mouth learned a little more about warmth every second it wore him. Above me, a slow, wet tapping began. Drip. Drip. Something dark landed on my forearm.
I looked up.
A brown stain was blooming through the living room ceiling in a ragged circle the size of a dinner plate. Another drop fell, striking the rug with a soft pad. Not water. Thicker than water. Grave-colored. The apartment groaned.
I moved.
I snatched my car keys from the bowl by the kitchen, my phone from the floor, and the heaviest flashlight from the junk drawer without fully deciding to do any of it. My body had outrun my thoughts. Good. Thinking had gotten crowded. Survival was simpler. As I crossed the kitchen, the overhead light flickered once and went out. Only the television now lit the apartment, throwing grainy static over cabinet doors and chair legs and the smear of dirt still drying on the table where the tape had first appeared. In that blue-white wash, I saw something that stopped me cold. On the refrigerator door, written in moisture that had not been there a second earlier, were 3 words in Daniel's handwriting. Check the voicemail. A banging came from the apartment door, again 3 hard blows, then many smaller impacts skittering around them like nails cutting wood. I opened my phone with fingers so numb I nearly dropped it. The voicemail app showed not 1 message now but 3, all from unknown sender. I had only heard the first. I pressed the second message and held the phone so tight it hurt. Static. A scraping chair. Daniel breathing harder than before. I didn't say this on the tape because I thought maybe I could still protect you if I was wrong, he whispered.
I wasn't wrong.
A long pause, broken by a distant metallic clang and the sound of something dragging across concrete. It wants you alone and moving. Once it gets your attention split between voices, reflections, and exits, it starts hurting. That means if you think you're choosing where to go, you probably aren't. So listen carefully. Paper rustled. His voice dipped lower. The garage box isn't just evidence. There's something in it wrapped in black cloth. Dad called it the unreflected thing. He wrote that it doesn't show up in mirrors. Glass, water, lenses, none of it. That's why he hid it in the wall. That's why he thought it could hurt the copy. My pulse thudded painfully at my temples. Daniel inhaled sharply, as if someone had opened a door near him. If you get to it, don't unwrap it inside. Don't look at it near anything that can hold an image. And Leo, his voice cracked. If you hear me begging, you have to remember I'm already the part of this it's wearing. The message cut off in a burst of static. My hand was trembling so hard the phone buzzed against my palm. I forced myself to play the third voicemail. This one started with no chair scrape, no static bed. Just Daniel speaking very fast, as if racing footsteps. I found the ledger entries Dad tore out. Something slammed in the background. The first witness wasn't our family. It was a gravedigger in 1919. Influenza dead stacked so fast they buried people by lantern light and got careless with names. He dug up the wrong coffin during a rain washout and opened it to identify the body. Daniel was panting now. His words came thin and urgent. There was no body inside. Just a mirror wrapped in funeral cloth and a set of wax cylinders labeled for the wife. She listened. Then the daughter listened. Then the daughter's husband. Every record says the same thing after voices from the dead. Reflections wrong by inches, the need to be let in. It spread through mourning houses because grief makes people watch the impossible longer than fear does. Another crash behind him. Closer. It isn't dead people coming back. It's something old finding the easiest shape. The box in Dad's wall contains the mirrors opposite something buried with it that never learned reflection. He wrote this 3 times, Leo, so don't forget it. A long hiss. Then, in a whisper so quiet I almost missed it. Copies can cross a threshold. Originals can't. The voicemail ended. I stared at the screen. The words locked into place all at once, aligning with everything else in a pattern so obvious I almost hated myself for needing it explained. It wanted in. Not the house. Me. Copies can cross a threshold. Originals can't. The apartment door shook again under another impact, and I realized with a horrible clarity that the front door was not dangerous, merely because something waited outside it. It was dangerous because stepping through it might be a threshold I could be tricked into offering. The back way. Fire escape through the bedroom window.
I ran.
The hallway divider exploded inward as I reached it. Wooden slats snapped across the corridor like ribs. One panel tore free and hit the wall. I threw myself sideways into the bedroom just as something lunged through the opening behind me with enough force to smash the chair flat. I saw only fragments: the black suit, a pale hand, Daniel's face pulled too wide by urgency it had not shown before. The bedroom door slammed between us. I hit the lock and shoved the dresser in front of it with all my weight. The wood jolted under an impact almost instantly.
Leo!
Daniel's voice again, right beyond the splintering door. Don't go out that window! I ignored it and yanked the blinds aside. Rain sheeted across the fire escape beyond the glass. The rusty metal platform vibrated in the wind. 4 stories down, the alley was slick and black and empty except for overflowing dumpsters and the silver shine of runoff threading toward the storm drain. Another impact hit the bedroom door. The top hinge tore halfway loose. I raised the flashlight and smashed the window. Glass burst outward into the rain. Cold air hit my face like a slap. I climbed through, slicing my palm on a remaining shard, and dropped onto the fire escape landing. The metal screamed under my weight. Behind me, the bedroom door cracked straight down the middle. The thing wearing Daniel stepped into the room. For one suspended second, it paused at the broken window and looked out at me through the rain. The street light from the alley below lit its face from beneath. Daniel, yes, but half assembled from memory and wet clay. One eye slightly lower than the other. Smile too thoughtful for a chase. Mud packed beneath fingernails. Water running down the clean black suit we had buried. It rested both hands on the windowsill but did not climb through. Copies can cross a threshold.
Originals can't.
So which was this? Then it spoke, and my blood turned to ice. I'm not the one in your apartment. Something moved behind me on the fire escape landing above. I looked up. Another figure was climbing down from the roof. This one did not wear Daniel. It wore me. Not perfect.
Not yet.
But enough that the differences became more terrible than resemblance. The shoulders a little too narrow, the mouth learning my shape while it used it, the eyes too patient. Rain ran over its face and did not make it blink. One hand gripped the ladder rail, long fingers black with mud. Below me, from the lower flight of stairs, something else was coming up. A third shape in my father's denim work shirt, neck bent at a dead angle, dragging one foot with a slow clank against the metal stairs. They had done exactly what the television said. Brought the others. The bedroom copy Daniel at the window smiled faintly, almost sympathetically, and mouthed a single word through the rain. Run.
I did.
Not down. Up. I bolted up the iron steps toward the roof because the father copy was climbing from below and the thing with my face was descending from above, but not quickly. Leaving gaps, leaving roots hurting, Daniel had called it. So I did the one thing panic rarely permits. I broke the route they wanted. At the next landing, I leaped over the side rail onto the neighboring stairwell platform, hit hard, nearly slipped on the wet metal, and kept going. Rust bit my palms. Rain blinded me. Somewhere behind me, one of them moved with a quickness that belonged to falling things, not bodies. I reached the roof hatch level and slammed shoulder first through the half-jammed maintenance door. It burst inward. The roof was a black plane under storm clouds, puddled and glittering, cluttered with vents, ductwork, and the squat outlines of old HVAC units. Wind shoved at me so hard I staggered sideways. The city around me was a blur of sodium lights, wet brick, and distant sirens. For one wild second, I thought I'd bought space. Then I saw the roof was not empty. A fourth figure stood near the far ledge beside the maintenance shed, half hidden in rain. Smaller. Thinner. At first, I thought it was a child. Then lightning flashed, bleaching the roof white, and I saw my mother's face looking back at me from 40 feet away. Not old as she was now. Young. Pregnant young from photographs. Hair dark and pinned back, hospital gown hanging damp from narrow shoulders. One hand rested over a stomach not yet showing. The expression on her face was raw with pleading. "Please," she called in my mother's voice, though the lips lagged half a beat behind the sound. "Please, I'm cold." I stopped dead. That was the moment I understood the depth of the thing. It was not copying only the dead I had known. It had reached into the family record, into photographs, tapes, grief that predated memory. It was not constructing people. It was constructing access. The roof door behind me banged open. The thing wearing my face stepped out first, rain slicking its hair to its forehead. Behind it came the father copy in the work shirt, and beyond them, framed in the doorway like an usher at a funeral, the Daniel copy from my bedroom. All three paused. No rush. No wasted motion. The My Face copy tilted its head and spoke with my exact voice. "You only have to choose one of us wrong." Wind tore at my shirt. The cut on my palm burned with rainwater. I backed toward the maintenance shed, eyes flicking between them and the thing wearing my mother by the ledge. Then I saw it. At the base of the shed wall, wedged beneath a rusted conduit box where rain had washed the tar clean, someone had scratched words into the roofing sealant years ago. The letters were almost gone, but lightning gave them shape. "West Wall first, don't look for me, D. Daniel had been here." Not metaphorically, literally. He had stood on this roof before he died and left me a message in the tar because he knew whatever followed him might rewrite anything made of paper. Screen or voice, but maybe not something carved with bleeding fingers into a rooftop no one inspected. The copies saw me look. All four of them moved at once, not sprinting. Gliding into speed, smooth and coordinated, converging from every angle with the certainty of a trap finally sprung. I turned and hurled myself at the neighboring building gap. It was insane. 6 feet at least, maybe more in the rain, with 4 stories of alley yawning below. But the neighboring roof over Dad's old garage extension, part of the row house attached to my building decades ago, was there. Lower by a foot, close enough that survival and death had been reduced to an argument in muscle. I jumped. For one endless second, I was only falling through rain and darkness. Then my hand slammed the far ledge. Agony shot through both shoulders. My chest hit brick hard enough to empty my lungs. My feet kicked over open air. Above me on the roof I had left, the copies gathered at the edge and looked down. My face among them. Daniel's face. Dad's. My mother's younger face. All blurred by rain and distance into a family portrait from hell. None of them jumped. Copies can cross a threshold. Originals can't. Maybe they needed invitations. Maybe they needed routes prepared by recognition. Maybe the gap mattered in ways walls didn't. I didn't wait to test it. With blood-slick fingers, I hauled myself up, rolled onto the neighboring roof, and stumbled toward the old external stairs that led down to the alley beside my father's detached garage. The garage we had sealed after his death and barely used since. The garage with the workbench built into the west wall. As I reached the top stair, lightning flashed again. In that white split-second light, I saw one more message painted across the garage roof below in long brown streaks that the rain had not yet fully washed away. Not paint, mud, or blood, or both. In my own handwriting, written before tonight, or by something that knew how my hand moved. If you open the box, one of you leaves a moment later. Every copy on the far roof turned its face upward in perfect unison, as if hearing some signal from inside the storm. And from inside the dark garage below me, something knocked once from within the west wall. The knock came again from inside the wall. Not loud, close. The old garage crouched in the rain below me, roof glistening black under the storm, windows opaque with grime. I stood at the top of the iron stairs with one hand clamped over my bleeding palm, staring down at the side door while the copies watched from the other roof in silence. They had stopped moving. That was worse than pursuit. 4 figures stood at the ledge where I had escaped them, my face, Daniel's, my father's, my mother's younger face, and None of them shouted now. None of them begged. None of them called my name. They only watched, heads angled slightly the same way, as though what happened next no longer required force. The storm had thinned to a hard, cold rain. Sirens wailed somewhere far off and went unheard by the world that still thought itself ordinary. My body hurt in sharp, practical places, shoulders from the jump, shin from the coffee table, palm from the glass, lungs from panic and cold air. But beneath that pain was something steadier. The end of running. I went down the stairs. The side door to the garage stuck halfway, swollen by years of weather. I shoved harder. It opened with a groan that sent a shudder through the whole frame. The smell that rolled out was exactly the smell of my childhood and exactly not. Motor oil, wet wood, rust, old sawdust, mouse droppings, the faint acid bite of paint thinner, and underneath it, fresh grave dirt. The single bulb over the workbench was on. I stopped in the doorway. I had not turned it on. The garage looked almost the way my father had left it 11 years earlier, as if grief had preserved it in layers. Pegboard on the back wall. Wrenches hanging in neat silhouettes. Red toolbox beneath the bench. Coffee tins full of screws and bolts. The old radio on the shelf, dead and dusty. Everything webbed with neglect but still arranged by his hands, still carrying the rhythm of a man who wanted every object where he could find it in the dark. The west wall stood behind the workbench, and from within it came one more knock. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. The moment the latch caught, the garage went very still. Rain continued on the roof, but faintly now, as if the building itself had sunk an inch deeper into some other layer of weather. The bulb over the bench buzzed. My own breathing sounded too loud. I scanned the room for glass and saw more than I wanted. The little dusty mirror screwed beside the fuse box. The filthy panes of the windows, the chrome on the tool drawers, even the black dead eye of the old radio dial. Reflections everywhere. Daniel's voicemail returned to me with brutal clarity. Don't unwrap it inside. Don't look at it near anything that can hold an image. I moved fast. I grabbed the canvas tarp covering the lawnmower and threw it over the fuse box mirror. Yanked an old drop cloth from a shelf and draped it over the windows. Turned the chrome toolbox drawers toward the wall. Smeared muddy hands over the radio face until it lost its shine. The room dimmed with every surface I blinded. By the end, only the overhead bulb and the small yellow halo of my flashlight lit the bench. The knocking from inside the wall stopped. I stood there listening. Nothing. Then, softly from the other side of the garage door behind me, Daniel's voice said, "Leo." I closed my eyes once. Not again. I turned to the workbench. Dad had built it directly into the studs, thick plywood top bolted to braces on either side. I seized the crowbar hanging from the pegboard and rammed it under the bench lip. The wood shrieked. Nails popped. My shoulders screamed in protest from the roof jump, but adrenaline put its hand over the pain and pressed. I tore the first brace free, then the second. Then kicked the lower cabinet doors open and ripped out old paint cans and boxes of screws until I could see the drywall behind. A rectangle in the paneling. Slightly newer wood grain. Hidden in plain sight, the hollow. I jammed the crowbar into the seam and pried. The panel broke inward with a dry crack. Dust puffed out. Something inside shifted and thudded heavily against the studs. Behind me, knuckles tapped the garage door 3 times. Polite again. I ignored it and reached into the cavity. My hand touched a metal box first. Cold. Rectangular. Old army surplus by the feel of it, dented lid and latch. I dragged it free and set it on the workbench. Under it lay a bundle of papers tied in waxed twine, a cracked leather ledger swollen from age, and beneath those something wrapped in black funeral cloth. Even through the fabric it felt wrong. Not hot, not cold. Not textured in a way my nerves could name. My fingers wanted to slide off it as though touch could not fully decide where it began. I snatched my hand back. The knocking at the garage door ceased. A moment later, from outside the left-hand window, my own voice spoke through the rain. "You don't have much time." I didn't look. I opened the ledger first. The leather gave with a wet little creak. The pages smelled of mildew and iron gall ink. Handwriting layered over handwriting in different decades, my father's block print. Daniel's harder pressure, older cursive hands fading brown into the paper. Entries circled, underlined, corrected in the margins. Panic preserved his method. I turned pages quickly, flashlight trembling over fragments. 1919. First verified account. Opened wrong coffin during washout. Mirror present. Audio present. No body. Wifeless. Witnesses followed the bereaved. Pattern mistaken for haunting. Not haunt. Transmission plus imitation. Copies improved through invitation, memory, and repeated view. Family lines only because family grief is stable access. Then, on a page nearly torn free from being handled too often, my father had written in thick black marker, "The copy wants permission. The original wants return. Don't give either your face." Under that, Daniel's handwriting, "Dad was wrong about one part. There are not two things. There is one thing split by witness. Reflection makes the copy. Burial keeps the rest." My skin crawled. I flicked further. A loose note slid out and landed on the bench. I flattened it with my bloody palm. It was Daniel's writing, rushed and uneven. "Leo, if I die before fixing this, the only chance is to reunite them without a witness present. The reflected part needs to see what it cannot become. The buried part needs to cross where no eyes hold it. If anyone watches the joining, it has a shape again. Then it picks the watcher." My heart beat once, hard enough to hurt. Then I looked at the metal box. Army surplus. Heavy. Likely what Dad had called the burial account.
I opened it.
Inside were old documents wrapped in oilcloth, a rusted watch, a human tooth yellowed at the root, and a packet of brittle black and white photographs tied together with black thread. I should not have looked. Daniel had warned about records, about lenses, about image itself. But I needed one fact and still believed I could take facts without being taken in return. I pulled the top photograph free. A burial crew in raincoats stood beside an open grave under lantern light. The photo was ancient, silvering at the edges. The men were blurred by motion and weather, but the coffin between them was clear. Its lid stood open. Inside, instead of a body, lay a tall mirror wrapped in dark cloth, and beside it, a second bundle the size of a small child. On the back of the photo, in a careful hand, someone had written, "Do not uncover both at once. One remembers, one refuses." Something moved in the image. I dropped the photograph with a cry. Not imagination, not nerves. The shape beside the mirror had shifted beneath its cloth like something breathing in old paper darkness. The photograph lay face up on the bench now, and the burial crew were all looking at me. No at the camera. No through the camera. The overhead bulb burst. Glass rained onto the workbench. The garage plunged into darkness except for my flashlight beam and a pale wash of lightning seeping through the cloth-covered windows. Outside, every voice began at once. Dad at the door. Daniel by the window. My mother on the roof. My own voice above them all.
"Leo, open up now, we can still fix it."
I swept the flashlight beam wildly and caught the workbench mirror I had forgotten to cover, a tiny shaving mirror screwed beneath the upper shelf. In its black oval surface, the garage behind me was full. Not empty full. Occupied full. Figures stood shoulder to shoulder in the dark corners, too many to count. Copies wearing generations I knew and generations I did not. Men in old burial coats. Women in hospital gowns. Children dripping grave water. My father. Daniel. My mother, both young and old. Versions of me at 12, at 20, at 31. All imperfect, all watching. And in the center of them, directly behind me in reflection only, stood something taller than the rest. Faceless not because it lacked features, but because it had too many trying to arrive at once. I smashed the shaving mirror with the crowbar. The reflected crowd vanished. A roar hit the garage from outside, fists, bodies, nails, all the patient quiet gone at last. The door buckled inward. The window glass quivered under impacts. The walls themselves seemed to flex around the hidden hollow where the box had slept for years. It knew I was close. I snatched up the black-wrapped object from the cavity and nearly dropped it again. It seemed heavier now, denser, as if being moved woke it. Under the cloth, something hard and curved shifted against my palms. Not mirror smooth, not bone. Something in between. I shoved the ledger, Daniel's note, and the oilcloth packet into my jacket. Left the photographs. Left the tooth. Left everything else. The side door behind me bulged. Splinters jumped from the frame. I remembered the words painted on the roof in my own hand. If you open the box, one of you leaves not it. One of you. There had always been a possibility the copies were not only coming for me. There had always been the possibility I was already one. The thought hit with almost physical force because suddenly too many details rearranged themselves into suspicion. The voice in the static had been mine. The warning on the roof in my handwriting. The sentence whispered into my ear before I heard it on the tape. The way the apartment had seemed to know where my attention would go next. The thing on the fire escape wearing my face. What if it wasn't making a copy of me? What if it was comparing versions? The garage door split down the middle with a crack. Long fingers appeared through the break. I ran to the back of the garage, kicked open the narrow service hatch that led into the alley behind the neighboring lot, and burst into the rain with the wrapped object held tight against my chest. The alley was a channel of darkness between brick walls. Water streamed down both gutters. Trash bags trembled in the wind. At the far end, 20 yards away, the cemetery hill rose beyond the chain-link fence and rows of street-soaked stones. Of course. Not random. Never random. The burial part needed return. The reflected part needed to see what it could not become. The graveyard.
I ran for it.
Behind me, the garage erupted. Wood shattered. Metal screamed. Feet hit puddles. More than 2. More than 4.
Many.
Their voices chased me through the alley, begging, commanding, comforting, furious. Leo, wait. Don't show it there. Come back. I hit the fence, climbed, slipped, tore my palm open wider, dropped hard onto the cemetery side and kept going uphill through wet grass and tilted stones. My shoes sank ankle deep in mud. Rain blinded me. Lightning flashed close enough to make every cross and angel statue leap white from darkness. At the top of the rise stood Daniel's grave. Fresh earth, wilting flowers, headstone dark with rain. And around it, as if they had been waiting since before I was born, stood the copies. Not approaching now. Arranged. A ring of the dead in all their borrowed faces, leaving a clear path for me to the grave. Daniel nearest the stone. My father opposite him. My mother young and old at either side. Several versions of me among them. Dozens more behind, older and older until faces blurred into family resemblance without memory. All watching with the stillness of an audience that believes the ending has begun. Only one of them moved. The faceless tall thing stepped forward from behind Daniel's headstone and stopped in the rain. When it spoke, every mouth in the cemetery moved with it. Open it. I was so cold I could barely feel my fingers. My lungs burned. Mud sucked at my shoes.
Why?
I shouted. The mouths all smiled at different speeds. So one of you can leave. That answer stripped away the final illusion. There would be no bargain, no explanation, no human-scale honesty. Only pattern and hunger. I looked down at the wrapped object in my arms. No reflections here. No windows. No lenses. Just rainwater, and even that I avoided. Daniel's note. The only chance is to reunite them without a witness present. Without a witness. How do you stop witnessing when your own eyes are the trap? Then I remembered something small and stupid and utterly Daniel. When we were kids and wanted to carry firecrackers somewhere unsafe, he would make me shut my eyes and hold his shoulder so only one of us could get blamed if Dad caught us. Can't testify to what you didn't see, he'd whisper, grinning. I almost laughed then, almost sobbed. The copies took one collective step forward. I dropped to my knees at Daniel's grave, turned my face down toward the mud, and shut my eyes. The rain hit my eyelids. My heart pounded against the wrapped thing. No witness. Not none. Blind. I groped for the cloth knot and pulled. The fabric loosened. Something beneath it shifted with a dry, papery sigh that seemed to come from underground as much as from my hands. Around me, every voice in the cemetery changed at once. Not words anymore. Screaming. I tore the cloth away and hurled whatever it held forward onto the top of Daniel's grave without looking. The world convulsed. Wind slammed into me hard enough to throw me sideways. Mud filled my mouth. The ground heaved under my knees. All around me, the screams rose into such layered misery that they ceased to sound human or inhuman and became something more basic, the noise of forms being refused. I kept my eyes shut. Something cold and immense passed over me, not touching skin but stripping identity in its wake, as if names and faces were papers pinned to a wall in hurricane force. I heard dozens of bodies hit wet earth, heard stone crack, heard a voice that was mine and not mine laughing directly above my head, then choking on the sound. The pressure built more, then collapsed inward with a sound like a coffin lid slamming at the bottom of a well. Silence. Not ordinary silence. An emptied one.
Rain.
Far traffic again. My own ragged breathing. I lay in the mud for a long time with my eyes still closed, because opening them felt like a choice I no longer trusted. At last, slowly, I raised myself onto shaking elbows. When I opened my eyes, dawn was coming. Gray light spread over the cemetery, thin and exhausted. The storm had broken. Mist clung low to the grass. Daniel's grave was in front of me. The headstone had split clean down the middle. On the fresh earth between the halves lay a broken mirror blackened from within, its glass crazed into 1,000 webbed fractures. Beside it rested a bundle of soaked funeral cloth wrapped around nothing. Empty folds. Whatever had been inside was gone, or joined, or left. The cemetery around me was empty. No copies, no family ring, no figures in wetsuits. Only mourning. I got to my feet too quickly and nearly fell. My whole body shook with cold and shock. My jacket pockets were heavy with the ledger and notes. My cut palm was packed with mud.
My face felt numb.
Then I saw that someone was standing on the path below the hill. A man in a dark coat, back turned to me, looking out through the cemetery gate toward the waking street.
He was about my height.
My build. For one bright moment, horror lit through me so hard my vision dimmed. The man turned. It was me. Or almost. He had my face with no visible distortion at all.
My eye, my mouth.
My rain-plastered hair. But his expression was wrong in a way so subtle it took a second to locate. He looked rested. Entirely rested. Like someone waking from deep sleep after years of pain. He studied me with a quiet, almost tender curiosity. Then he glanced down at his own hands as though still learning them, flexed his fingers once, and smiled. Not wide, not monstrous, just enough. I lurched back, but my foot hit Daniel's cracked headstone and slipped in mud. When I looked again, he was already walking toward the gate.
Wait!
I shouted, voice breaking. He did not turn around. He passed through the cemetery entrance and onto the sidewalk beyond, merging with the gray ordinary morning where commuters were beginning to appear, umbrellas rising, car doors slamming, the city resuming itself around a thing it could not possibly recognize.
I ran after him.
By the time I reached the gate, the sidewalk was empty. No one in either direction except a woman walking her dog half a block away and a bus sighing to a stop at the corner. I stood there shaking, watching strangers move through the wet dawn, each face suddenly unbearable in its possibility. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped it when I pulled it out. One new voicemail. Unknown sender. Length, 7 seconds. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then, because terror is a habit and grief is worse, I pressed play. For 2 seconds there was only static. Then my own voice, calm and close, spoke into my ear. Don't watch this one alone. The message ended. And in the black screen of my phone, just before it went dark, I saw Daniel standing behind me one last time, not pleading, not smiling, not wrong at all. Just tired. Just sad. And slowly, like a brother trying to warn me without letting the warning spread any further, he shook his head.